She has served as the driving force behind the operational reimagining of some of Canada's most important technology companies. Throughout a career spanning more than 20 years, she has served in a series of increasingly senior executive roles with eStruxture Data Centers, National Bank, BlackBerry, Bell Canada, and IBM Canada, among others. And she has a master's degree in business administration in marketing informatics and sits on the board of the Stratford Festival, Tech Nation, and the Merry-Go-Round Children's Foundation. We're so pleased to have her here with us today, and we welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar. You can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll take them throughout. Thanks so much, Jamie, for joining us. I'll hand things over to Sandra to begin.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. I'm so delighted to have Jaime Leverton here, as Sophia mentioned, CEO of Hut 8 Mining. We're going to talk about some very timely topics related to crypto mining and generally speaking the crypto industry. But before we do that, I'd love to, first of all, welcome you, Jaime. Let's kick off with just people getting to know you a little bit better. We just heard your bio, but everyone's journey is different into crypto, and yours, particularly into Bitcoin mining, is a very unique one. Do you mind just sharing some of your initial thoughts on how you got into it, how you found out about it, and what led you to be the CEO of Hut 8 Mining?
Yes, it's a big question. So as kind of my bio denoted, I've been in the technology industry in Canada for over 2 decades. And I've been in and out of the data center world for the majority of that time. Starting with IBM in the early 2000s when IBM was still doing co-location. And then the last 5 years at 2 different Canadian companies doing cloud data center managed services. And then during the peak of the last bull market, I was the general manager of Canada and Asia Pacific for a data center company. And all of a sudden we started getting all of these inquiries for people looking to bring Bitcoin mining rigs into our data centers, which was a completely kind of new industry. And so that was kind of my first introduction to Bitcoin mining. And that's when I tripped down the rabbit hole for the first time and really got to understand not just Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, but blockchain. And once your eyes kind of open to that world, it's really hard to go back. And that was certainly my experience. But then the bull market turned, as we all know, the bear market came around, and so I stayed in the traditional data center space. But then this past August, I got the call about the opportunity at Hut 8 and whether or not I'd be interested in pursuing it. And it just seemed like such a great opportunity to combine, the 20 plus years I've spent and my knowledge from the traditional data center and high performance compute space into the world here at Hut 8. Digital asset mining is really high performance compute, and the parallels between traditional data center and what we do in mining there's more similarities than there are differences, and there's a lot I think that both industries can learn from each other. And my belief is we're going to see more and more convergence of digital asset mining and traditional data center and high performance compute. And so I'm happy to be kind of on the forefront as somebody that really understands both worlds. And I'm constantly looking for opportunities to pull what I know from my past experience in tech and data centers into what we're doing here at Hut 8. And we've certainly had a very busy 7 months since I took the helm on the 1st of December. And I'm beyond thrilled with the progress that we continue to make here with our little Canadian company.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up the parallels and the crossover between traditional data centers and digital mining. I was formerly at CME Group, and we had a large data center in Aurora, Illinois. And I remember we actually sold it because there was this view that kind of data centers were going away. We didn't need them because of all this other, people were going to the cloud, and cloud service providers might have data centers, but you don't need them as a business. But actually, this might be a second chapter or maybe more than a second chapter, but for data centers, do you see an increased uptick in the usage and demand for data centers because of the drive of digitization and digital asset mining?
Absolutely, for sure. And I think now more than ever with the upheaval that we're seeing in China. So as somebody that has a hosting line of business, so we do self-mining, we also do hosting, and then we have a very significant Bitcoin position. So we actually have the largest amount of self-mined Bitcoin on balance sheet of any publicly traded company in the world. And we actually put that Bitcoin balance to work to earn revenue for us as kind of a third line of business. But because we have a hosting part of our business, we've had an absolute frenzy of activity over the last few weeks. People looking for data center space and for power in North America. And so certainly we see a massive wave of demand right now for North American data center space, which I don't think is going to slow down in the short term.
Right. Well, that definitely, let's put a pin in that. I do want to walk back one step because we didn't properly introduce Hut 8 mining. If you could just talk very basically for the folks who are not as familiar, because we've got a lot of international folks out there. What is Hut 8 mining? How did it begin? And you mentioned the different lines of business. If you could just kind of talk about how that's evolved, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hut 8 is, we started as a Bitcoin miner. We started trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange, on the Venture Exchange, early 2018, graduated to the Toronto Stock Exchange proper last year. And then 2 weeks ago, we actually uplisted to the NASDAQ. So we now trade on the NASDAQ as well. We're a Canadian-based company. Our headquarter team, myself included, is located in Toronto. All of our operations are based in Alberta, Canada. You can see behind me, that's actually an aerial view of our site in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which obviously we're incredibly proud of. So what I took over December the 1st. As I said, we were a pure Bitcoin miner. And then we have since branched out. We now have a hosting side to our business as well. So we have currently in production, we have 109 megawatts, again, all in Alberta. And we use 13 of those megawatts are used for our hosting, and the rest of the power is used for self-mining. And then, as I mentioned, with the Bitcoin balance that we have, just over 3,700 Bitcoin on our balance sheet, 2,000 of which we put to work through partnerships with Genesis and Galaxy to earn a yield revenue on that Bitcoin, while we take advantage of the appreciation over time of that Bitcoin on our balance sheet as well. Right. So that's really who we are in a nutshell.
Great. Well, I think also you've just debunked the view that all Bitcoin miners, all they do is self-mine. Actually, you've got several different things, lines of business that you operate.
That's right. And actually, the other thing that we've recently announced, we made a strategic purchase with NVIDIA. So we purchased really, really industrial scale GPUs purpose built for mining. And those start to come into our fleet later this month. And with those cards, we'll start GPU mining for the very first time. Initially, our intention is to mine Ethereum, but to continue to settle in Bitcoin, actually directly at the pool level through a partnership with Luxor. So again, just continuing on that evolution of diversification. So not just a Bitcoin miner, also getting into GPU mining as well.
Yeah, I'm going to underscore that. Crypto miners don't just mine Bitcoin. They're actually expanding across other cryptos, but also into other business lines, including hosting and putting their Bitcoin to work.
That's right. That's certainly us.
We're going to come up with in the next couple of years. There's a lot of potential areas for you guys to go into. But let's talk about crypto mining as it stands today, because I think there's a combination of right concern around the environment in general for any industry, but also there's, I think, perhaps been a tilted view of that Bitcoin is just wasteful, the mining is just useless, it's, you know, it's not great for the environment, but also on top of that, it's not good for society. I think there's been a lot of negative press out there, but the reality is the facts, right? Like, let's get down to the facts. And when you think about particularly North American mining versus other geographies, what do you see?
I see predominant use of renewable and sustainable energy in North America, more so than in other geographies. I think one of the areas that we are really struggling with, and this goes back. It's a pattern that repeats over time. When the iPhone first came out, one of the big controversies associated with the iPhone was its power use. And was it really worth all of that power that smartphones were using? And of course, that's not a conversation that we've heard in years. Everyone just accepts that smartphones are an important part of everyday life, and the power associated with them isn't controversial anymore. So part of, I think, the challenge with Bitcoin is people still don't really understand Bitcoin. They don't necessarily appreciate its beauty and its intrinsic value and the hope that it brings to hundreds and hundreds of millions of people that are currently unbanked, and really what a true decentralized global financial system can bring to the world. And so that kind of lack of understanding and appreciation in Bitcoin in general, I think can fuel some of the narrative around Bitcoin's energy use. The reality is the Bitcoin network uses more renewable and sustainable energy than any other industry. But it's not well documented. It hasn't been well explained to the media. And so we're actively working as an industry to try to counter this FUD and get the facts out there. And certainly that's something that the North American mining industry has taken very much to heart, and we are very active in doing and trying to work together to get the message out there.
And I'd like to add, thanks very much for that, Jamie, because I think that's important for us to get better data out there, better figures out there, just as a counterweight to that as well, or in addition to that. A lot of mining is also moving to Kazakhstan and different other places around the world. And so what we're trying to do at the GBBC is also work with certain governments we are very friendly with, and also we're trying to discover how much of it is actually going to be led by fossil fuel usage and how much of it's going to be led by renewable usage. And we're seeing green shoots. I don't want to overstate this. In certain places where we know fossil fuels will lead, there are green shoots of renewable usage. So I think as an international community and industry to keep the pressure on, we're going to see that will only just widen the gap of increasing renewable usage, and frankly, hopefully be the driver of an industry leading the path towards renewable only. So I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. Are there any trends that you're seeing geographic wise while we're on the topic that you think worth mentioning around what's going on right now with all the mining shutdowns in China?
Well, look, I think the mining shutdowns in China, it's very real. I think this narrative has come around in the past, but I think it's more real this time than anything we've seen historically. And there's always been some noise around how much mining was done in China. So I think broadly for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin network, more decentralization, geographic decentralization of the mining is a good thing. A lot of the provinces that have been shut down were using coal. So as far as the network using more sustainable sources now with less coal on the network is also a good thing. And then of course for miners that are actively in production, such as ourselves, we are expecting a difficulty adjustment this week, down between 23 and as high as 25%, which of course is incredibly good for the bottom line of all of the rest of the miners on the network. So I think we can't ignore the positive aspect for us from that perspective.
Great. And When you look at it from a Canada, US increasing growth of digital asset mining, in particular right now, Bitcoin, do you see a move towards more startups or groups forming in the next year? Do you see more competition coming as well?
I think so, for sure. Anytime there's a bull market, or there's an industry that is incredibly profitable, naturally it brings more entrants. It's just economics. So absolutely, I think we'll continue to see more people come into this space. And that's the beauty of the network. The network itself is always kind of self-regulating, and it's by design. So yeah, I think we're going to see it.
So we'll have more startups or more groups coming up with their own, mining solutions or offerings. But could you break down for us, as someone who's in operation and knows the nuts and bolts of how to actually run one, what are the considerations? It's not just electricity. There's many considerations. Could you break it down for those who are interested of what it takes to run a crypto mining operation?
Yeah, so not all miners are created equal, of course, as you wouldn't expect them to be. In the case of Hut 8, we run all our own operations with all our own staff. So our sites are manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have our own tech repair shop. So we do on-site repair and maintenance of our equipment. Obviously, uptime of the machines is critically important. So you need to make sure that you keep those machines up and running as much as possible. So there's staffing considerations there, in addition to the staffing and ongoing operations of the site. There's a lot of talk right now about all of these miners leaving China and coming into North America and looking for power sources. Of course, that conversation is more complicated than I think a lot of people understand. It's not just about finding the power, but then you also have to build out the electrical distribution to actually get the power from its originating source to be able to power up your containers or your data center. All of which are impacted by the current supply chain constraints. So like in our case, you can see we use container-based data centers. So each of the containers represents 1.2 megawatts of power. Some people use traditional bricks and mortar data centers, but all of these things are currently constrained. Steel, there are steel shortages, so containers have longer lead times when it comes to building out electrical distribution. A lot of the components are currently constrained. So for somebody to kind of set up a new site from scratch, you're looking at probably current timing, 9 to 12 months, kind of best case to get that site built out, up and running. Then of course you've got all your staffing considerations that go into that as well. And then how you manage the miners, what kind of equipment you're using. Like there's all of the tech side once you actually have the power up and running, but there's a lot of execution involved, and there's a lot of execution risk right now for people that are new entrants coming into the space.
Thank you for raising that execution risk. It's all about how do you get it set up and then actually running successfully. So appreciate that. Let's talk a bit more about, you're getting some questions coming in from the audience around the data and the facts that we mentioned. Do you think there is work being done? Actually, I can say there is work being done around getting reports out, getting better data out. We know that you're part of a mining council, and I know at the GBC we've had a number of conversations with some of the miners, of which you guys are also a member, around what kind of facts do we put out there and how do we do it in a way that is thoughtful and doesn't have a defensive tone, because at the end of the day, every industry uses energy. So in your view, do you see that information coming out soon? How much work do we still need to do as an industry? What do you need help with as an industry from others to help support getting the word out properly?
Yeah, look, I think the key is we're all in this together. If you're a believer in Bitcoin, then it's in all of our collective best interest to make sure that the right facts are getting out there and that we're collectively counteracting some of this FUD. I know that from a Bitcoin Mining Council perspective, there has been a lot of work done already to gather some preliminary data, and I believe that some of it will be released Thursday night. I think that Michael mentioned that on Twitter yesterday. So that's kind of the first data that you'll see from the Mining Council. But certainly the intention behind the council is all about educating and being transparent and really trying to counteract this negative media attention that continues to come at Bitcoin and at Bitcoin mining. And so just really we welcome everybody's participation. For those interested in joining the council, it's obviously an open forum, and we encourage everybody to participate. And ultimately, we're just trying to work together again to counteract this negative noise.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And looks like some initial pieces of data may actually be coming out this week. So good to see. And for those who are interested, look out for it. Okay, well, let's talk about moving beyond just the energy usage conversation. Let's talk about sustainable systems and resilient systems, because we at the GBC, that's a major pillar of focus for us as a thematic, meaning how do we make sure, no matter what industry you're in, you are building resilient and sustainable systems? So when you think about that from a Hut 8 mining perspective, obviously you're thinking about the energy component of it, but it also involves partnerships and people. And, how are you looking at some of the other elements of the business beyond the energy usage and making sources are good?
Yeah, so we've taken a very top-down and bottoms-up approach to how we think about ESG in its entirety, not just the energy side. We're one of the few Bitcoin miners that has a diverse representation of a leadership team. So half our leadership team is female at a board level. We've got 40% female representation on the board. We also, when we think about kind of the E in ESG, we think about what is our waste management program looking like? All of our facilities now have LED lighting. 90% of our fleet is now electric. So really just looking at a holistic approach to ESG and making sure that we're not just attacking kind of the hot topic of the day, but we're actually being very, very thoughtful about the framework and how the organization that we want to build end to end, and the culture that we're all about. We also have our own in-house counsel who is our head of regulatory, and part of her kind of mandate is how we look at the S and the G side of our business and being really thoughtful about that. So yeah, it's something we're committed to very much holistically, not just, addressing the energy conversation because that's the hot topic of the day, really building out a framework that's robust across the platform.
Fantastic. And I will have a question for you around how you're dealing with, from a regulatory perspective. Obviously, I know you're not the regulatory person, but it would be good for us to get a sense. How are you engaged with the regulators and or government in Canada? Is it something where, you guys have kind of in communication? Is it generally a favorable environment for crypto mining?
Yes, I would say certainly the province of Alberta, which is where our operations are. Those are the governmental bodies we work most closely with. Very favorable. Alberta is incredibly energy rich. I think safe to say there was a lot of disappointment with the canceling of the Keystone Pipeline. So there's a lot of excitement around new industry coming to Alberta that takes advantage of that really energy rich landscape that they have. We work very closely. This site, as I mentioned, is in the city of Medicine Hat. We work really, really closely with the city, who's actually an independent power authority. So they're our power provider. They're also our landlord. So we're blessed with incredibly positive relations with the government, and we think there's an appetite to really work together to drive more innovation, to partner on the conversation around energy. Alberta right now, the Alberta grid was historically dependent on fossil fuels. They've made huge investments, which they'll continue to make. The grid's now at 20% renewables, and over the next 5 years, they're pushing up to 30% renewables of the grid itself. So just incredibly positive momentum in the province, and we're thrilled to be a part of it.
That's fantastic. It's always good when you can have a symbiotic, friendly relationship with the local government and beyond. When you think about Hut 8, it's really as a public company. I mean, it's NASDAQ now. It's gone from Toronto Stock Exchange to NASDAQ. Does the increased pressure of a public company, what do you think about that? How does that work for you guys, especially since you're growing so quickly and you're trying to be nimble, but yet you're now also, subject to public markets, which is a good and a bad thing. If you could just give some insight to folks who are interested, being public is a big deal.
It's certainly, it's not for the faint of heart. As this is my first role as a CEO of a public company, and there are things that you're prepared for, and certainly things that you're not. We have a very, very active retail shareholder base. We've got a ton of just incredibly positive and supportive shareholders. But then, of course, we have some that can be more challenging. So the amount of scrutiny that we're under, and certainly a lot of it comes to me, directed at me personally, and
Sure.
So that is a new experience, and as I mentioned, it's really not for the faint of heart. I've had to get, my skin's had to thicken up a little bit, because there's a ton of opinions. They're loud, they come at you every single day. But as I say, broadly, an incredibly supportive base of shareholders that I just have so much gratitude for, and they certainly keep us on our toes. And I think it's an important relationship for public companies to have directly with shareholders, so that you're getting that feedback, and because ultimately we're responsible to our shareholders, and it's something we take very, very seriously.
Absolutely. That's the key. Yes, you are responsible to your shareholders. If I take a moment, I'm going to take a look at some of the questions we have coming in from the audience. There is one from someone named JP who's asked, just for you to define a little bit better, what do you mean by renewables? Is it predominantly solar, wind?
Oh, the grid in Alberta?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mix. It's historically been more wind than solar, but they've made some massive solar announcements. As recently as last week, they announced a new solar farm being put in, and Amazon's actually participating in that, which is super exciting for the province. So a mix of wind and solar is the answer. It was historically more wind, and now much larger investments being made in solar.
Great.
And there's also a lot of work being done around hydrogen as well in Canada. So I think we're really excited to see where that can evolve to, and a lot of investments coming into that area.
Fantastic. Good to hear. And thank you for that additional clarity. We're going to go back to a couple more focused questions around mining from earlier part of our conversation, just because you're getting a few questions there. With the new mining machines, I think they're particularly asking about the GPU mining. Mm-hmm. What power draw hashes, someone's clearly interested in some of the more specific. And then there was a follow-up from the same person, I think, who said, with Ethereum going to proof of stake, and in air quotes, real soon now. We know anyone who's been in the space for a while has known that this conversation has been going on for years, but hopefully there is a transition in earnest very soon. But what are some of your thoughts? And then now obviously answering the question around the GPU mining specifics.
Right. So we purchased 10,000 cards from NVIDIA. So that represents 1,600 gigahash. We expect the power profile of that to be around 3 megawatts to power the full 1,600 gigahash. As I mentioned, we will mine Ethereum initially using Luxor's pool, and we expect that to be able to add 2 to 3 Bitcoin per day once the fleet is fully up and running by the end of August. So I think that answers the first part of your question.
Right.
With respect to Ethereum moving proof of stake, I think there's still a very large question mark on timing. I think I don't want to guess, but we believe we've got quite a bit of runway still with Ethereum being proof of work. And then the beautiful thing about GPU mining is you can move to the next most profitable network. So right now, that would be Ethereum Classic, but of course it will continue to evolve as things move and timing gets solidified with Ethereum.
Fantastic. And for the audience, I am moving to questions now, and I see a bunch of them coming in, so appreciate that. Keep them going, and we'll keep answering hopefully until Jamie's time is up, but appreciate all of the various questions you've got. You've got some thankfulness for being on and sharing your thoughts, and then also a serious topic around money laundering and terrorist financing within the crypto industry. There is a perception that crypto mining facilities may not be doing enough. So I guess it's the crypto industry this person's talking about. Anything really the crypto mining industry specifically, you think, other than generally speaking, we're all trying to make sure that there is ample collaboration with regulators, but do you think there's anything specific to crypto mining that can be done to prevent such activities from taking place?
Not with mining specifically that I can think of. We've moved to North American mining pools. So Luxor's the pool that we've earmarked for our GPU mining. The bulk of our Bitcoin mining is done through Foundry's pool. And obviously they take great lengths to make sure that there's security at the pool level, and we've been incredibly happy with our partnership with Foundry on the pool. But I can't think of anywhere else that would apply. I mean, I think that's another one of those narratives that Bitcoin just has to tackle. The reality is there's a lot more nefarious activity being conducted with fiat cash than there is with Bitcoin, and I think those are just the facts. And unfortunately, we struggled to get those facts appropriately portrayed in mainstream media sometimes. But I think that's kind of my perspective there.
Yeah, someone said to me, you've made it big when you're being sued and people are attacking you. I don't know if that's a sign of success, but it certainly is a sign of you're getting attention as an industry. So if I were to, we're getting a lot of questions here. So there was a more lighthearted one, but then I realized, JP, you're actually asking a very serious question here. First, JP said, is there snow in Alberta? But then he had a reason for asking why there is snow in Alberta. JP then followed up with, Texas just had a freeze for 2 weeks and solar panels did not work. How do you address this in Alberta?
Right. So Alberta has a lot of snow. One of the things we love about Alberta is it's a very, it's part of the prairies in Canada, which means it's very, very dry. It's very flat. It's very windy. And the summers tend not to be too hot. The winters tend to be very, very long with lots of snow, which is beautiful conditions for Bitcoin mining, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. They love cold weather. That's where they run the most optimally. I got fixated on the snow. Remind me the second half of the question.
Well, the main question was, how does Alberta deal with, because solar panels didn't work when the freeze happened in Texas. So
right.
How is it mitigated if a lot of it's solar?
Right. So Alberta, as I say, 20% of the grid's renewables right now. The balance is still heavily natural gas, and obviously natural gas doesn't have the same struggle with the climate. And I think part of the focus on hydrogen as an option is to think through what's best from a renewables perspective in a climate that is more cold, like we have in Alberta and in Canada in general. And so where there isn't hydro as an option, the prairies being very, very dry and flat, as I mentioned,
Right.
we need to look at alternate sources for renewables, which there's a lot of R&D underway for that. But the short answer to your question is, because 80% of the grid is still natural gas based, that it's able to handle the load. Bitcoin miners like ourselves, as I'm sure you guys are aware, during peak demand, we will shut down or ratchet down to feed the grid so that the local communities are never suffering at the expense of Bitcoin mining operation. We have a very symbiotic relationship with the local communities, and we want to make sure that they get the power that they need for those periods of time when we're into a peak situation, whether it's because of a blizzard or a heat wave.
That is a very important point you are making. It is about Hut 8 mining and others actually giving back to the grid when there's peak usage, not the other way around. So really pointing that out. And Neil has a comment for you. It's not really a question, but he says, thank you so much, Jamie. Completely agree. And also on point regarding presenting our industry's perspective, because we often get overridden by the prevailing narrative spun by others who'd rather attack. There's a lot of questions here about the future. I'm going to try to bundle them up, but there's one in particular about something you mentioned, which is your leadership is actually very well balanced. And it's a rare, unfortunately, it's a rare occurrence, particularly in crypto mining. This person had to say, tech and blockchain tend to be very male dominated, mining even more so. What advice do you give to women interested in entering the space, particularly on the mining side?
Well, I would say, so being new to mining 7 months ago, and having come from tech is traditionally male dominated, especially in the more senior rank. So I've been no stranger to that. But then coming into Bitcoin mining, I really didn't know what to expect. Of course, I knew it was more male dominated, but there are a number of strong women in this space, and more so than any other experience I've had in my career. They've been incredibly welcoming. So regardless of, how you might deem us to be competitors in the space, the strong women in mining all reached out to introduce themselves very early on in my tenure. They've been incredibly supportive and helpful throughout the last 7 months. I owe a debt of gratitude to the women in this space, and I would encourage more women to come into this space because there's a strong network of support here, and we're looking for more people to come in, and we certainly encourage it. I think it's, despite there not being a lot of us, it's the most positive, supportive group that I've ever encountered.
Well, glad to hear that. And the good news is I think I will attest at least that in the last 5 years, we've seen more diversity across the board into the crypto and blockchain space than we had previously. So there's progress being made, but always more room for more progress, as always.
Of course. I have two daughters. My daughters are now 13 and 11. And I encourage them to think about a career in tech, because the reality is, like, every industry is a tech industry in one form or another today.
Absolutely.
And I have had a career that has surprised me every day, challenged me every day. I've never been bored for a minute. I can't imagine working in another industry. And I hope young women, not just young women, I hope every young person takes the time to really understand what a career in tech means and what a day in the life of a tech exec looks like before they make any other decision.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Always challenged, always having to think on your feet. And I would say learning probably something new every day, right?
Every day. Absolutely, for sure. You're constantly learning.
There's a question here from someone who wants you to take biggest misconception of the industry in general, let's say crypto industry in general. What would you like to debunk? What do you think is one of the biggest sort of, misconception, misunderstood parts of the crypto industry?
They don't realize just how robust and professional and how far the industry has come. I think that kind of idea that crypto is still what crypto was a decade ago when the industry was kind of first getting started. I don't think people have really evolved their thinking or understanding of what it is today. And again, as we kind of talked about at the top of the hour, my belief that we will see a convergence between traditional data center and traditional tech and digital asset mining. I think that's happening. That'll happen more quickly than people realize. And I think there's been so much progress in this space in such a short period of time. I think a
phrase, and it will only proliferate. So the question is, how will we as leaders shape it? And how will you as a leader of a company shape the crypto mining industry? So that will lead us to a couple more questions we have, which is for you to think about and share with us any thoughts you have around what is the next 5 years for Hut 8. I would even argue what's the next year, because so much year, let alone 5 years, but the longer term vision for Hut 8. And then further to that, what are some of your thoughts and hopes for the future of crypto mining overall as an industry?
Yeah, so big questions. We actually put out a press release yesterday talking about our vision for the next 6 to 12 months, and that was a big bold step, because there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. And the way I have approached the helm here is I want to make sure when I put something out publicly that I have a path to get there, and that's really important to me. I take my role incredibly seriously, and I take the expectations that I set with shareholders very seriously. So we did that yesterday, and there was a ton of work that went into that. But when we were going through that exercise of preparing the 6 to 12 month view, we did think about, can we build a 5-year plan? Like, are we in a position to build a 5-year plan? And the reality is, no. 5 years is a lifetime in this space, and there's way too much movement. There's way too much innovation happening so quickly that it felt like a bit of a fool's errand to try to go that far out. So that's where my head is there. As far as the industry itself, I still think we're in the first inning. I really, really do. As much progress as we've made, we still have many, many miles to go. Obviously, a lot of excitement coming out of the news in El Salvador over the last few weeks, but really, again, just the beginning of the art of the possible with respect to global adoption of digital assets in some really material, potentially future changing ways. And I think that's what we all expect to see. that's what we're building for. I think all of us in this space are believers in the power and the hope that this brings to the citizens of the world. And I think if we didn't believe, I wouldn't be here.
That's right. None of us would put in the hours and the effort and the dedication. And let's face it, the mind space, right? It's not just about your time. It's just like ever thinking about how to improve or build on a given situation. So appreciate your thoughts on that. And we've actually blown through our time. It's been amazing. Jaime, I'm going to leave you with one last final set of words on entrepreneurship. And for those out there who are thinking about starting a company, or maybe they're struggling with the challenges of being an entrepreneur, what advice do you have for anyone out there in the world who is either looking to start a company or struggling to be an entrepreneur? Any words of advice or inspiration?
Well, I'm not an entrepreneur myself, and it's mostly because I honestly think I'm not that creative, and every idea I've come up with, someone has already thought of it. But I'm a risk taker in my own right, in that I've built a career based on transformation mandates. So I can't be afraid of risk when I take on a new assignment. But the muscle that I had to learn to work in taking the risks that I've taken in my career, one of it was just trusting yourself. Like, you are actually in control of your own destiny, and you have to believe in yourself first. And then you also need to ask yourself the question, what's the worst that can happen? And kind of sometimes doing the mental calculus of what's the worst that can happen, when you realize the worst isn't actually that bad, it can give you the confidence you need to just take the plunge and move forward. But certainly it starts with believing in yourself, and really just doing the work, doing all of the thinking can get you to the right place to make the decision, and ultimately just do it. And I can honestly say, I haven't regret a single move that I've made in my career, and I've made a lot of them, and they've all ended up building on top of each other and building towards a career that I grew up in a small town, and as a little girl growing up in a small town, I have already lived all of my wildest professional dreams, and it's an absolute gift. But it started with just those two things: believing in yourself and figuring out that the worst isn't actually that bad.
Well, thank you so much for that. I completely agree with you. Sometimes it's the mental blocks that we put up that are often things that prevent us from going ahead and doing it. We are so glad to have you. We are really appreciative of your time. We know you're super busy. One final note, how can people follow you? What is the best method or medium to follow Hut 8? How do people make sure that they keep in touch with all of the great activities and executed deliveries and news coming out of Hut 8?
Well, I have the benefit of an incredibly unique name. You may have noticed my first name's Jaime, but it's spelled Jaime, which is J'aime in French, or Jaime in Spanish. And then Leverton, also incredibly unique. So you can literally put my name in. You'll find me on Twitter at Jaime Leverton, LinkedIn. Our website, Hut 8 Mining website is hut8mining.com. We are in the process of building a new website, which I'm incredibly excited to launch by the end of August. So bear with us while we go through that kind of last lift from our marketing transformation, but that's happening the end of August. And I try to be available. We have an incredible head of IR corporate development, Sue Ennis, who makes herself available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to our investor community. So we welcome feedback. We try to be as engaged as we possibly can, and that's how you find us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, and really appreciate your time. And we'll be following Hut 8 and cheering you on in the backdrop. But again, thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Sophia.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Just to echo what Sandra said, thank you so much, Jamie, for taking the time to join us. It's been a real pleasure. And to everyone who joined us today, if you enjoyed the episode, we encourage you to follow us in GDF Online for additional content. You can also join us next week on July 6th for the next episode of the Global Leader Series, which is with Greg Foss, Executive Director of Validus Power Corp, which is actually a Canadian power provider that works
And our partner. Greg Foss is a great friend. Validus is our partner. That's going to be a great show. I will tune in myself.
Excellent. We love the connections made in this space sometimes. We will circulate a link to this recording as well for you to watch and reshare it as you'd like. Thanks again, Sandra and Jamie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks again.